Would like to start to thank Mill 6 for the invitation. It's a big pleasure to be again here in Hong Kong. And of course, the support of our Royal Dutch Consulate here to make also this possible. We really are happy that we can exchange our professional practices. Before I will start with my presentation, I would like to give you a small introduction. And that introduction means that I would like to express a little bit more about our institute. Because the name of it is the Textile Museum. And it suggests that it's only a museum, but it's much more than that. It's a combination of a classical museum, including a textile lab, sort of incubator. And that incubator tries to facilitate artists, designers, architects, and fashion designers. And what we try to do is to facilitate them with all they need to realize their dreams, their ideas, to execute this in our textile lab. And I think there are a couple of challenges now for museums, especially museums who are dealing with cultural heritage. I think the world around us is changing rapidly. And what we try to do in our museum is to make more things possible than in general museums do. Because I think cultural values are no longer sufficient for a museum. Museums are considered reliable and respected institute for knowledge and information, but there's potentially much more to be exploited. The museum is more than just a cultural institution. I think that its economic and social values can directly affect our society. And for that reason, we are really changing the concept of our museum. That means also that there will be a direct consequence on the use of the museum collection. It's gaining a new role in relation to these changes. We will have to change our programming of the exhibitions, our educational programs, and the way we deal with our community. In order to do so, the new museum has to become also much more entrepreneurial. I will come back to that later. Before I start with the presentation, I would like to introduce a small video. It's only 4 minutes, and that brings you back a bit to Tilburg to have a better idea and a better explanation later of what I'm trying to show you. Maybe we can start the video now. That's perfect. It's 4 minutes. So this is our first impression of the museum. And now I will take you to where it all started, because industrial heritage from the textile industry shaped our first museum concept. The Textile Museum, to give you a rough idea, is located in Tilburg, which is in the southwestern part of the Netherlands. It's between Antwerp and Rotterdam, to give you a small impression. The city has had a long history in the wool industry, and it already started in the Middle Ages. And for hundreds of years, it was the backbone of the local industry. And as a result of the mechanization and industrialization, the local wool industry underwent a rapid growth, and until 1881, Tilburg had as many as 145 wool mills. You can have an impression here how the city looked like in that time. The city of Tilburg was not only the Dutch wool capital for a long time, it also exported textiles worldwide. And after World War II, Tilburg retained its place as a wool capital of the Netherlands. Unfortunately, in 1960, the textile industry totally collapsed, and by 1980 there were not many wool mills left. Many industrial heritage buildings were destroyed, and buildings formerly serving as wool factories were now used for small-scale housing projects. This period, from 1960 to 1980, is known as the black page of the history of Tilburg. And many people got unemployed and the city deteriorated. The textile industry deemed to have a negative connotation. The local government tried to alter this by initiating a museum that served as a sort of memory reflecting the ages in which the textile industry brought prosperity and welfare. On the remnants of hundreds of years of textile craftsmanship and textile industry, the museum was established in 1958. This is not the situation for 1958, but it started as a classical museum showing in a historical perspective the prosperity of the textile industry. But after a while, we considered this not to be sufficient enough anymore. We were thinking about creating another sort of more active museum to make a better connection between the museum as a heritage keeper and our audience. So in 2008, that was the picture before, the museum was reopened after large-scale renovation with a complete different approach. It was a combination of the Textile Museum and the Textile Lab. In other words, a creatively working museum. And the interplay of the restored industrial building and the modern architecture reflected, I'll take it back again, reflected the new concept of the Institute. The idea behind the concept was to create a dialogue about the past and the present of the local and European textile industry and the promotion of heritage-based creative industry. So it was a starting point for a small-scale, high-end, new textile industry, a niche in the creative industry in which artists and designers were invited to work. The nice thing was that local textile workers, which have always been working in the factories, were involved in the process of developing and producing new fabrics. So there was a new sort of positive identity for the old workers who were frustrated about being employed, and they could partly, of course, get new jobs in the museum. So the preserved industrial heritage buildings and the heritage collection of objects were the ingredients for establishing our first textile museum. It's good to realize that the collection was the starting point for the subsequent transition into a working museum, a combination of the museum and the lab, as I mentioned it. The beating heart of the museum is our lab. And here you can see a scheme. We started as an industrial heritage memory museum into a working museum. That's the present situation. And we are heading on, and that's the next stage. We are in the middle of it now, in developing it into a maker's museum. The thing is that the collection of the museum is considered often as a forgotten source of information. And we asked the curators to be our guides and translators through the collection. And by connecting this knowledge of the collection to the newest technology and the most modern yards and product developers and our technicians, new knowledge can be gained. I will show you a sort of overview of this source of cultural capital, we consider it. We consider it as a source of information which has been created for hundreds and hundreds of years. And much of this knowledge is forgotten knowledge. And sometimes it's a good start to make an innovation in our time if you confront this with new techniques and new materials and the view of an artist. And that's a way for us to create new design. And it's also having a focus on the new developments, and that's the making industry 2.0. I come back to that later. This overview, you can see what kind of tools we use. That's not only the collection, but it's also a collection of images, textile techniques, a big library, a specialized library, a sample collection, and a material reference collection. So our motto is we have that collection and we have to rethink the way we have done things till now. I will give you some examples of what we call the reinterpretation of new collections. I told you the collection is that source of inspiration for new designs, and we already mentioned that we invite artists, like for instance this one, it's a fashion designer, it's a famous fashion designer, Victor Errol, and all of them are really enthusiastic if they can stroll along the collection. In this time it was a damask collection, an old collection from the 19th and 18th century, and they were inspired by that, and they added a new streetwise graffiti on this tablecloth. And this was executed in our lab, and it's now one of the most best sold articles in our museum shop. So this is an example of how we work with our collection. Another one is, in our archives we found a forgotten recipe, and we could understand that in that time the recipe was written. It was not possible to execute that in a technological way. But now a new generation of technicians and this artist, Forma Fantasma, they used that recipe and succeeded in executing it, and they made this installation of it. It was a beautiful installation, and just based on a forgotten recipe in our collection. Another one. What you can see here, there was an exhibition about Jeroen Bos, and of course most of you will know it's a really famous Dutch Flemish artist, and it's not working. Yeah, it's working again. And what we did is we studied the way Jeroen Bos guided the fabrication of these gobelins. And in that same style, thank you, and based on really limited historical information, there was one of the tapestries missing, and that was in a way not too nice to show only 4 pieces of the tapestries, and there was one missing. although we know that there must have been an elephant on it. That was the only information we had. So we invited a Flemish artist to make, in the style of Jeroen Bos, a contemporary interpretation. And there was only one thing which should be included, and that was that elephant. So we made a big study on that. How could it have been? But in a modern way, we executed that. That was a really nice project to do for our lab. We also give collection assignments to artists because we think it's really important to keep our collection contemporary. So we have all these contemporary artists in our lab. So sometimes we ask them, we pay you for that, just make a new object for our collection, which is really contemporary, and that's also for us a cheap way to keep our collection updated. So this is what we do with our collection. And there is another project, and that's called Design for Everybody. We created our own label. And in that own label, we invite all kinds of artists and designers to make something with a story, and that's mostly the story of the artists, how they work, what are their creative sources, and etc., etc. And we make a lot of these items. Mostly it's household items like tablecloths, serviettes, etc. And that's quite successfully. We use that in our shop. We sell it in our shop. We also created a website. And for us, it's an interesting business model to earn profit and to use that profit for things which always cost money, like an exhibition. It doesn't give any profit. So we use our profit for non-profit activities. Then our lab. Our lab is considered as an ideal place to work. And the concept of our museum consists of 3 places which should be ideal for a certain group. The first one is an ideal place to work for professionals. That's mostly meant for artists, designers, architects. The second one is to create an ideal place to learn, and that's, I come back to that later. And the third one is an ideal place for the visitor. You come in as a visitor and you get out as a maker. That's the idea behind it. And these 3 worlds together are the basis of our concept. Just to give you an impression of our lab, you can say it's the beating heart of our museum. It's a unique knowledge center. It's a highly specialized laboratory for innovative fabrics and application. There is a high range of computers, really high-tech computers which are used in the industry. And they are assisted by our technicians who produce experimental woven and knitted textiles. Sorry. Modern embroidery, laser, and tufting machines are available, as well as traditional passementerie machines. So we also use sometimes a machine which is in a way part of the collection. The Textile lab, and that's what we really try to keep on, is an open source laboratory. It's accessible for both users, and users are the artists and designers and architects, but also for visitors. So by sharing the knowledge that we gain, we can innovate, and the innovation can stage at a more rapid way, and textiles can be developed further and faster. So a visitor can look over the shoulders of an artist, and I agree, they don't always like it, but we think this principle is quite important for us. We are trying to create this ideal place for designers and artists by facilitating them with all kinds of people. The first ones are the technicians behind the machines, these people who came from the industry. The second group of people are the product developers. They sit behind the computers, use the newest technology, the newest software, and make the translation of the sketch of the artist. And beside that, we gave them a yarn expert, which is traveling all over the world to get the best yarns, the most modern yarns, the newest yarns, to facilitate them with that too. And of course, our collection and library and all other reference collections. And what we together do is try to explore the endless possibilities of materials and techniques. The Textile Lab is known throughout Europe for its prototyping, for autonomous works, for exclusive productions for architects. And it's not only using the Textile Lab to execute collection assignments. We also have a sort of special research and development program in which research and experiment are executed, for instance, in the field of smart textiles and sustainability. That's why I was really fascinated this morning in the story your colleagues were telling here. It's a great job. Then I will show you some of the projects beside the first ones I already showed you we are doing. I will keep that a little bit short, but it's good to have this in a schedule. You can see at the top right, the collections are the source of knowledge and inspiration. Then there is a reinterpretation with modern yarns, new technology and product, and the product developer. And after that, you can choose, it will be a research project, there is an experiment, you need to have a proof of something, so we facilitate that. And what comes out is an autonomous artwork, a prototype, an innovation, or an application. And for students, we have another route. We connect them with the masters in our museum. And the focus there is really to develop their skills, their talent, and to develop their own signature. What we're trying to do is with schools is bridging the curriculum of an academy through our lab and to make a bridge to the market so that they can start their own businesses. And that must lead to entrepreneurship in the hope that these young people come back with their students to our lab and start again. That's the idea behind the concept. We always work with multidisciplinary teams because we strongly think that different skills are needed to create the best conditions for innovation. We also know that if you have really small scale teams, they work efficient, they work with a lot of inspiration, and we always include a curator in it, a technician, somebody who knows everything about the software, a guy, because it's mostly guides, who are behind the machines because they start to say, oh, at an artist, oh, this is not possible, but let me see what I can do for you. And it always is successful. And that's the spirit we want to have in the museum. I will show you some cases, but it was already done in a good way. Don't see you, Aura. These are fascinating projects also for us because we always select a project of which we can learn something too. That's the idea. And if we learn something, our people learn about that and they can use that information again for the next project. So that's the way we work together. This is one, it's told also a bit this morning, but in a different way. It's about the solar panels. So I skip this also. The inside-outside cooperation about the cosmic curtain. You saw that this morning. To put it in schedule, it's a 2-year project. And this is a really weird project together with an artist who is working also for the film industry. And this is combining crafts and technology. If you move along this exhibit, it reacts on sounds. it reacts on movement. And if you put it a bit in dark, it's really scary, I can tell you. Then the Textile Lab is also an ideal place to learn for us. I told you, there is a focus on developing talent and creativity. For other groups, we focus on permanent education, and we try to bridge the gap between the academy and the market. What we really feel is necessary that we educate on the creative process. We want the students, if they are in a high school or an academy, that they practice, and because if they do, they will really understand what they are doing. And I think we have an important role in that. So here you see some other groups. It really starts from basic schools to high schools. So we have a lifelong learning program. Then I come to the third one, and that's trying to create an ideal place for the visitor. What we are trying to do is, we won this year the National Museum Award 2017 for our plan to create the ideal world for the visitor. You enter the museum as a visitor and you leave as a maker. And this concept was based on that adage of Confucius. And we strongly believe in creating this ideal world is anticipating on the new development of the industrial technological areas. Because yesterday we spoke a bit about it, philosophers and visionaries speak of a new industrial revolution known as the making industry 2.0. So it's not about big scale anymore. It's about small scaling, and a lot of small scaling initiatives make a bigger scale, make things possible. And we strongly believe in that personalization and more focus on sustainability, and the search that's also really important for alternative resources, ask for a new approach of the present production techniques. There will be a bigger focus on the social impact of production and the use of energy, and also the production chain we deal with now. What we will do is offering visitors personalized and new interactive experiences. So the new visitor will be facilitated by our museum to create their own pullover, their own shawl, or designed tablecloth. Then they become a real maker in our museum. For us, it's the logical step to complete our concept with this ideal place to work and to learn, and also the on-demand visitor participation in a customed way. I'll hurry up a bit. We strongly believe in that idea of the open source. We have to share knowledge, because then we can make quick steps for innovation. What we also think is that, here's some example, the visitor becomes a maker, is that in all the things we do, if it's an exhibition, or it's the lab, or it's a publication, we have that focus on materials, on process, and final result. Showing the process and collecting samples are a catalyst, to our opinion, for innovation. But the future starts now. We're all facing new challenges. And I think the museum should more strongly claim the role in contributing to the local identity. And it should take a position in the creative industry. Because I think that the future museum, it will be a network museum that will form a more integral part of our society and our daily life. It should claim its role in contributing to the local identity, but moreover, it should adapt its programs to include young generations and newcomers in society. We have to find new ways to broaden the way to connect with our communities and to share an inclusive identity. That's not only about the past, but that's also about the present and the future. Steps have to be made to include traditional and non-traditional visitors in social interaction and participation. And this museum, the new museum, will be more about the present and the future. It looks back to explain where we came from and where it all started. And it's not only about one truth, it's also about opinions, about significance, about temporary values. And it's not aiming on target groups, but on communities. So participation, democratization, and inclusiveness will be more expensively developed in our new museum. I believe that the contemporary significance of the Institute of today is too limited. Paying attention to contemporary subjects like sustainability, social innovation, and inclusion are really important to connect with our communities. Go on. This is a really nice project. I have to say a bit more about that. We started a subjective bus line, and on that bus line there are the old workers which are behind the machines, and they take visitors from our museum. They drive along the old factories in the city and they explain where they worked, where they learned, and how it all started. And it gives a fantastic interaction with the local community. It was a really successful project. Another project, it's about social innovation. What we try to do is to create a social label. For people with a distance to the labor market, we include them, we connect them with a designer, and they start to make new things which look in an aesthetic way really good and can be sold in our shop. So it gives self-esteem, it gives a social cohesion in a group of people, and they are inclusive civilians in the city and not sitting home behind the screens. Another one, we want to be a platform for exchanging knowledge on sustainability and taking that position in the niche of the creative industry. Because, and then I will finalize, what we strongly think is that engaging the visitors' participation is strongly demand-orientated. So democratization and co-production and public consultation in collection and programming are new ways to include new visitors in the museum. And also they bring new perspectives and provide new connections. So we made a bid book for that third phase of our museum, and here we describe the goals for the near future. We will transform the museum into a network organization because we strongly believe that the museum cannot act purely on its own, with limited staff and funding. Not all disciplines needed are available in the museum to act effectively. So scientific institutes like universities, research institutes, industrial partners are in search for valorization. So I think the museum is a suitable partner in sharing the knowledge with the public through exhibitions, through educational programs, and through other activities. But also the local government and schools are important partners to cooperate with. For that reason, we will develop new facilities next to our museum, and you can see here, next to our museum is a complete big factory. It's empty, it's 4,000 square meters. And we are developing a plan for startups, creative startups, a residency for artists and students, and for partners for social innovation projects. And that will form the new network organization, the cultural hotspot that includes our museum. So the future is now, and we are ready to start to share experiences and knowledge, and look forward to interesting collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Errol. Frankie? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for staying until the last session. I believe after this we can have our dinner. Yeah, and the crosstalk. But I still want to thank Mizuki and Qingqing for inviting me here to share some of my experiences in Taipei that we've done in the Hongan Museum. And to start with, that like what is suggested in the title, that today I will give you some cases that we have done, and talking about how we realize, how we look at the relationship between history, especially textile history, and our audiences. And to start with, Hongan Museum is located in the Taipei in Beito area. And for those people who might know Taipei a little bit, Beito is very famous for relaxing, hot spring, this kind of resort culture. So to be located in Beito, we are actually always, people come to visit us because they are on their way to hot spring, which is also nice, I think. It's a good combination to come to the museum, have a look at the art, and then go to the hot spring. But anyway, Hongan Museum, founded in 1999, has been always dedicated itself to actually contemporary art and community art project. So when I was hired nearly 4 years ago, in this area in Taipei, actually, if you mention about Hongan Museum in the contemporary art world, it's actually quite known. You come up with a few of the keywords of video, new media art, or contemporary art, or conceptual art. So when I was hired 4 years ago, I was like, oh, this is great. It's my good opportunity because I come from this kind of background and I always love video artwork. I feel like, there are a lot of stuff I can do. So I'm fully prepared to, do a lot of different contemporary art program. Then, the first day I walked into the museum, the chairman of the foundation of the museum, showed me, first thing he did, he showed me the collection room. So I was taken to this room, and then he's like, Frankie, look, this is all what we have. And I really need you to do is please introduce this to people. I want people to know what we have. And this is actually, they are mostly modern Chinese embroidery work dated from some of them are from 1960, 70, and some of them are even like closer, 1990 something. So they are all from China, mainly from Jiangsu and from Hunan. So these are the main two kind of big embroidery making places, and they have actually very professional national museums and institutions researching about it. And by some chance, the chairman of the foundation of the museum, he had this chance of buying nearly 500 pieces of those works from China and from all those national museums, which, back to that time is totally forbidden. I believe he must have smuggled some of them to Taiwan. But anyway, he is very proud of it. And so when I look at it, I then realize that, I actually got this new job not because I'm good at doing contemporary art exhibition, maybe because, I have this responsibility of introduce these to people, especially maybe to the art people. So then I started to realize that, of course, then I spent a lot of time doing research and then, trying to realize it. And then especially when I am asked, when I was just started the job, a lot of my good friends from the area, they're all like, how's the new jobs like? And, what are you going to do next? And then my answer is always, I'm actually still studying like the history background of textile and of the embroidery. And they were like, really? So how come I've never realized that you actually have a big collection of it? But anyway, I was going to say that this is actually like the first time I realized it's my job. It's my job standing there to use a rather contemporary language, talking to my audience, and Also, the other part is I am facing such a big numbers of audience who loves all those embroideries and who doesn't give a shit about contemporary art. And I'm like, this is too twisting. I don't know how, like, is there any way I can put them together, or I always have to split the language? I don't want to feel always like, when I invite my contemporary art friends to the museum, the first thing they ask me is that, oh, there's no special exhibition now, you only have your collection exhibition. Oh no, I'll pass. Or I have another big audience coming in to see the collection, and they all say, huh, you are using your big spatial room for contemporary art, but we're here to see embroidery. So it's really, for me, a lot of studying, and I put a lot of efforts trying to put them together. So I have a few projects that I'll share with you. This is one of the first one that I try. We work with our in-house curator. We wanted to do an exhibition that is combining with our embroidery collection, and also with some invited contemporary artists, just put them together in a group show. The first one is we work with an animation an artist who are using these frame-by-frame techniques of animation. And then the picture that you see on the left-hand side here is actually an embroidery work. It's an embroidery work, but it looks like a ink painting, and talking about how embroidery is made, like in the studio. So we make that into an animation work. So it's rather educational for people to understand, how those works are done. And then we also work with this In Bloom group. They are actually a very interesting young group who make their own fabric and textile, and also they set up this brand, and they want to. They use a lot of different patterns from local, like Taiwan culture, on their fabrics, and then they're making clothes or lamps or a lot of different fabrics for people. So, and like what I say, next to it, you can see is actually a very important piece of embroidery work that we have. So we frame that as a window, like in the room, in the gallery. So it's kind of a comparative thing for audience to understand. And that piece of embroidery is actually an old Chinese history background called Xi Shi. Xi Shi is one of these beauty from very, very ancient time, and she is washing the clothes from the river. And then we also work with Hong Kong artist that I personally very like, Jaffa Lam. Jaffa Lam is she is making a lot of different projects based on her collaboration with local female Hong Kong local female textile worker. And so she's always, making different projects and very engagement with those people. And then this is her work inspired by the umbrella movement. And then she's using all those fabrics from the umbrella. This is another piece by Jaffa Lam. And then we also in this group exhibition, Modern Evolution, we are actually started to talk about textile. Also, not only by the material itself, but also we try to discuss the labor behind all these factories. I think a little bit like Hong Kong, in Taiwan also we used to be a very important textile fabric factory, OEM island for that. But then, of course, all the factories are moving out, so we have a lot of problems by those laborers who are actually dismissed because the factories are out and there's, they have no more job at all. So there's this line in this exhibition that we try to talk about the labor problem and the economic problem behind that. And this is one of the map we try to encourage our audience to look at the labels of their clothes, and then so we leave a big map at the side so they can give us all those labels and then tell us where those clothes are made. So we pin them on the map. But then, of course, I guess you can all guess that most of the pins, most of the labels are located, say that, North Africa and mainly in Southeast Asia. This is one of the work by Kang Ya-ju, and she was doing the residency in Thailand. So the pattern you see on the floor is actually, it's a bit dark, but the pattern on the floor is made of soil, and it's a very traditional kind of Thai pattern that they use for their clothes. And apparently those patterns are something to do with death and birth at the same time. So she was using soil on the floor and inviting the audience to walk on it. So starting from very beautifully, fine patterns, in the end of the exhibition, all the soils are all destroyed. So kind of an indication of, what is gone, it's gone. It's like life. And we choose this work because it's actually quite similar to some of our embroidery collection that we exhibited outside. You can't see here, but we exhibited outside of this wall, and it's exactly the similar pattern that from the Miao group of China. So there are actually, lots of similarity there. And then also, you see there is a documentary, El Salvador Journal, which is talking about, like I mentioned, that, a lot of factory, this is one of the factory that is set up in El Salvador, and then because of the factories they closed the factory, and all those workers from the factory, they actually have a big petition for losing their job and not being really well taken care of. Anyway, so after this try of having an exhibition that we try to bring two groups of people together, then we wanted to try something else. So we talked with contemporary artist Ho Yiting. Ho Yiting is she is actually always concerning about still image and how to change the material of still image so that you can add something extra on it. So we work with her. We invite her to our collection room to look at our embroidery collection to see if there's anything inspire her. And then I think it took her maybe around at least like 1.5 years to think about it, and then to really look through our collection one piece by one piece. And then she decided to use one of the double-side embroidery to be her inspiration for the new video artwork. Studied from some of her old works, she is using photo that she took from a very local Taiwan market thing. So all that you see at the background is actually one of the market in Wanhua. So she took a photo there. Then on the photo, she is using embroidery, giving a new touch of the form and the clothes, the costume. And then a lot of those images that you can see is actually from some of the very famous Western masterpieces of paintings. So like this one, as it's indicated, is the white-chested robe. And then you can see the birth of Venus, which, that's artist herself, standing right in front of a, butcher market stand. Yeah, and this is another one that she's using this blue magic flower, on top of it. So there's a big room that, those are some of her like old works that we find it interesting how she combine photography with embroidery. Then here comes it. Here, this is the work that she chose. It's called the dual variation embroidery techniques that they use, and it's a very unique kind of techniques that the master actually they will do. There's a window there you can see, right? So if you flip the window, you see from the front is the face of that lady, but if you flip the window, you see the back of her head. And it's totally like sewing on one piece of cloth, which, for embroidery, it's a very high secret hidden techniques that, they won't let anybody know that it's actually like, one of their specialty thing. So she chose this piece of work to do one of her video that I will show a little bit so it's easier to understand. She basically gave an image of this embroidery piece to somebody from the market doing the embroidery. And of course, it's not as fine as the original one. But then she started to destroy the piece. It took her, and then she made the video, she fast forwarded and then backwarded and put in screen, but use double side. So it's kind of an imitation of this, double side embroidery work, but by using video on it. This is the one that shows that, it's the, I think it's the backwards. So as you can see that because this is a backward video, so it's actually, you see more and more of this. Okay. Anyway, so it's a very nice experience to work with her because through her point of view, then I started to understand that, how if people like me who are not familiar with embroidery work, how can I proceed it? How do I make this approach? And then she actually gave us a lot of good ideas when she's thinking about it. And we have a lot of meetings. And then she, even afterwards, during this exhibition, giving a small workshop to talk to the general audience about how she think about it. And that give me this feeling that, because I feel like I'm a kind of person that if I want to persuade my audience, I need to persuade myself first. So it's to work with contemporary artists about it. It's really a way of giving me a good reason or to convince myself that I have the ability to convince my audience that how this is made and then how we can talk about it. So this is what you can see from the gallery. There are two screens, and then she's using both sides of the screen. So one side is look like making the embroidery, but the other side is taking it down to destroy it. And then so for both sides, one will be fast forward, one will be backwards. And then, like I say, because she also had small workshops about it, so that brings us to think about that. Since we are doing a lot about contemporary art, and then we have a lot of this textile embroidery work, and then how we look at it as a museum space, and then how we can do that together to do something with the community, which, in Teoh, it's a very strong cultural art community who believe that we are having a very strong history background in Teoh. Then, one of those days, one of our good friends, also a volunteer of the museum, she came to me and said that, oh, do you know that actually my mother is also an artist who is doing something about fabrics and textiles, and maybe you will be interested to know what she is doing right now. And because they live in Teoh, so they come to the museum a lot. And I'm like, oh, really interesting. So maybe I should know a little bit more about it. So she introduced me this amazing group of women that they call themselves the fabric or the textile playing sisters. They are a big group of, a big numbers of them, and I'll show you a small video. This is who they are now, and I'll show you a little bit of them 20 years ago.
黄布工作坊的起源一开始我有听那个彭书讲，因为她是迪化街布商的太太，她每年都看到很多布商在清仓库的话，把这些布清掉，她觉得很可惜，这些可以给社区妇女来做这样的布。她本身是妇女新知的义工，所以她就跟绿红跟秀华他们谈这件事情，所以那时候就说要做一个布艺嘉年华。 一个社区妇女其实像对我来讲是就内向的就闭塞，你知道不？你走入街头又拍谁会害羞嘛？那其实，在那样的敲锣打滚的气氛下又有一群那个老人协会，就花枝招展的啦。他们反而年纪老的人退休的老人更开放，那我们也会受他们的影响。就这样走下来，我们觉得说。 那种感情很微妙，变成情同自己的姐妹，又默契感又十足，兴趣一种
就是拼贴、拼布就是拼布，就是用很多不同的布去组合出，也许是抽象的图案，也许是具象的图案。另外一种就是 DIY， 就是做一些什么猫啊、皮包啊，就是很多 DIY 的物件，当然就是这两种类型。
哪些是你也需要，可是你没有得到的？ 拥抱，没有人写。拥抱，想在家加上去，拥抱。现在站起来，拥抱一下。拥抱一下。哎呦，漂亮！然后一个小。站起来，站起来，站起来。
And then they did the festival that you see together, and then every year more and more. Okay, back to them. That's them, 1998. So 20 years later, because of this amazing lady came to us and said that, oh, I'm also a fabric artist, maybe we can do something together. Then I started to know, oh, actually they are still doing something together. Maybe not very actively, or they haven't been doing a lot of exhibition, but they still feel like they are very attached to each other. They have this big sisterhood that they feel like they need to share with people. So they come to the museum, and it's really a great opportunity for us. So we talk to them about it. They say that, okay, we are going to offer you this. We're having this proposal that we are going back to do this every week workshop in the museum again. and then see what we can create for the museum. So we have this deal that we invite them for, I think we've done this for 6 months, that they come to the museum, they have their own meetings and workshops, and of course, some of them still remaining, but you can see some of the young ones are actually some of them are the next generation, so their daughters or even some of the daughters' friends. And then starting from the workshop, they are meeting and they talk about each other's life and what is done in the past. Then they make the work together through the workshops, and then we open an exhibition on that. This is also, we try to not only having the workshop behind the exhibition. In the exhibition room, we set up a table that we say that, this is a kind of exhibition we want people to join in and then to really do some work or having some discussion there on site. So they come up with this idea of having a table right in the middle of the gallery room and inviting the audience to join them. And this is when they are trying to explain to each other of what they are making, what's their life stories. Some of those are really life-touching stories. For example, this one that you see is made by a woman from originally from Hualien, but she moved to Taipei, say 30, 40 years ago. She worked in Taipei, but her hometown is in Hualien. And back to that time, to go to Hualien is a little bit difficult by train. It took you like 6 hours to go home. And because the working situation was quite bad at that time in the factory, she was working in a textile factory. She only had 24 hours in a week. So every time she wants to go home, it took her, like she had to take the night train, going back home, stay for 4 hours, and then she had to take a train back to Taipei to work. So she made this work with all those fish. This is a way that she remembered about her hometown of Hualien. So there are fish, there are sea. And then when she was, telling the story, it's really touching that because they are not like professionally trained artists. So when they talk about their story, they don't use a lot of, very professional terms to say that, but it's a lot of emotion behind it. This is also very touching that one of the lady, I believe now she must be something like 80. This piece is firstly shown in that festival we just saw 20 years ago. And at that festival, she was the one who is wearing this outfit with like the beautiful hat and the outfit. Then 20 years later, when she was participating in this exhibition, she ate the wheelchair on it. So I asked her that, why is this? And then she's like, we get old. So I can no more like wearing this and walking in the street. I need a wheelchair. That's just my life. So I feel like there's something reflecting in them that, when they learn how to express themselves through the work, it's really fascinating. Those are some of the works. And then also they encourage like each other, they want to include each other in the installation. So there are a lot of kind of interactive there during the opening. And then this is, all the photos, what happened between those 20 years. And these are the third generation already. So this is what I've been done for the past few years. And then now we are actually having a new show that you can see a brochure outside as well, that we are trying again to bridge our audience from rather a craft or textile background and also the contemporary art background. So this is the new show that we are doing. So if by any chance you guys will be passing by Taipei, please come and visit us. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. Please stay for the crosstalk. Errol, may I also invite you to join the crosstalk? This section of crosstalk will be moderated by Chin Chin, co-director of Chat.
Thank you, Errol and Frankie, for those very, very inspiring sessions. on how you're transitioning your cultural institutions. I wanted to do a short recap here. Both museums started off being endowed with a collection that was not who you are today. You started with an industrial textile museum that was more about industrial heritage, old history, and old machines. And you started with an embroidery collection. But now you're transitioning from a classical museum to a maker's museum. And you're transitioning from an embroidery art museum also into a contemporary art museum, but yet connected to embroidery. So in making those transitions, I wanted to also ask what are the biggest challenges you face in terms of subjects like change of audience, because I'm sure your original audience in your original museum identities and the new audience you have to engage are going to be slightly different? Or how do you think about those transitions of audience?
Shall I start with? Yeah, it is a challenge, I have to be honest, because you start with a classical museum and a classical museum visitor. So at the beginning, you get a lot of comments on that. So we don't like that, or what is this? And beside that, you also have to deal with your funders,
Yes.
the city government.
Yes.
And that's also quite a challenge because they expect you to serve the public in that way, and that's okay. But I always try to explain to them that we serve only a part of the public, and that can be much bigger, can be much more inclusive, because the museum is for everybody. We should nobody exclude. And a politician can't say no on that, because we are dealing with everybody. So that's what I'm always saying, and I have to say that many times. And after that, you see that you get support from certain political parties. Yeah, oh, they are right. Oh, they are right. And but it's a challenge to deal with that.
Actually, after I carefully think about it, like I say, to start with, I feel like this responsibility I have as a museum is actually trying to bridge two extreme different groups of audience together, right? Then after we've tried various of different programs, I actually find it that when I face an audience that are from, say, a rather elderly generation, I thought it's going to be difficult to communicate with them about contemporary art, or especially like we are specialized in video art. Every time I feel like I try very hard to use their language and trying to let them understand what is video art, and that is actually it's not a film, it's not animation, it's video art. I thought that is going to be difficult, but then after a few years, I realized it's actually an easy part, because it seems like they are a lot more open than what I thought, and then they might not like it, but they are very direct about it, that they don't understand, but they won't refuse to see it. They will keep coming back to the museum and keep asking questions about it. But the difficult part is actually that when we face the young generation, where I try to say to them that, do you know how to appreciate a good piece of embroidery? Do you know how to look at it? Do you know that, actually the history behind it is not just a history, it's involving with, it's something to do with our contemporary life? But I had most of the response like, it's nothing to do with me, I'm not interested in it. So let me know if next time there are something else. So I find, I actually, that, you look back at yourself about it, you're like, this is actually interesting that, it's not something like what I thought. Actually, my challenge now, like I did feel like it's a big challenge, is how do I communicate with the so-called young generation? Yeah. I thought I was part of them, but I'm not totally.
Okay. All right. And the other question I also wanted to ask was about cultural entrepreneurship and how important it is, in your case, to collaborate actually with commercial firms, such as Inside Outside, and actually be present in places like Qatar, where you don't actually have a physical museum location, but they know of the Textile Lab collaborating in that process. But a lot of times also in Hong Kong, publicly funded museums, there's always that resistance of being connected to commerce and connected with identifying with a particular business purpose. And that mindset in Hong Kong could be quite difficult to change. And I wanted to kind of get your ideas on how you manage to also bridge that gap, to say, yes, we're going to go out and work with commercial firms and give our ideas and input and make it a project that we participate in that sense. And how do you kind of show that you're not picking one versus the other? Because I think a lot of publicly funded organizations in Hong Kong always face that problem of saying, okay, you are sponsored by one developer, why should I prefer to work with you? Or how did you manage that conflict?
It is a conflict, to be honest. We are, in general, funded for 60% of our total funding by the local government, and that's already quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And they always say loudly, oh, you have to be more entrepreneurial and so on. But I want to keep myself close to the content and do only the things I can accept as a cultural institution. So I will never become a profit institute, mm-hmm. but I'm okay with profit for non-profit. What I mean with that is, if we can develop some business models, we did. I gave that example of our label made by Textielmuseum. Sure. And I also showed a couple of cases of cooperations with architects. Yeah, of course, they have to pay for that, for the hours, for the machines, and for the things we do. But we always say that the profit we gain from our cafe, from the label, from the income from the visitors, we always reinvest for the ambitions the museum has, mm-hmm. and for which there are no local fundings anymore. Mm-hmm. So, to my opinion, that it's a good story to tell to politicians, to tell to the public. We are not for profit, but we use the profit we earn to do the good things and to realize the ambitions we have. Mm. And nobody is against, also not a politician, against a lot of ambition. So I can get away with that. Mm.
Good. And for you, you're a privately funded museum. So what kind of challenges do you face when you're trying to transition your identity? Do you get any sort of resistance from your founders or your sponsors? How do you work with them to create this new identity?
Well, the museum, yes, it's founded by one private collector, which is the chairman, but then at the same time, because he's from electronic business background, and he's one of the first generation of Taiwan businessmen in the computers and things. So he actually has this really good connection with his peers, which are the big branding, Acer, Asus, all these big computer companies. Mm. And so we are having a lot of support from them, I have to say, luckily. But then if we want to talk about a challenge that I kind of feel like, maybe in 10 years' time, this could actually turn to be the biggest problem, because then we are now having this image in terms of funding. When we talk about our money, where are they from? That most of the people will thought that, oh, they've been supported so much, so they don't need more.
Yeah.
And it's not only a money problem. I mean, of course, that we can try to seek for some other fundings, but then I feel like as a director, when I'm trying to make the networking, the connection, you have this wall from all the other areas who are not from, say, computer background. They all feel like, I don't have to work with them because I'm not
They
part
feel
of
like
their
you're
group.
representing the other community. The
That I find it really difficult. Is actually, there's a wall that you have to break through.
Maybe I may add one more thing, which is really a challenge, and that is to keep the quality of the things you do high.
Yeah.
And to keep the artistic value high. You always have to fight for that, because a lot of politicians come to me and say, oh, you're doing well. Maybe buy 2 other machines, do some more production. And I refuse that. I can always explain that I only want to do on a small scale, the highest quality, and that's about it. And if not, I get away.
Yeah. Great. So I would like to also open the floor. We have 5 minutes. I would like to open the floor for questions for our both speakers here. Harold? Hold on, for the mic. There we go.
Do you have any problems with censorship? Because most contemporary galleries or museums, they face a lot of censorship when the issue is political. So do you have any problems with that?
Both of us?
Yeah, both of you.
To be honest, not really. I think we can do quite a lot of things. You only need to have a good story behind it, why you are doing that. And to my opinion, if you're working in the artistic field, the cultural field, you can do a lot.
And my answer will be not really as well, but I do feel like I think the problem is censorship is from, say, the artist or the idea makers, and I hate it. I really, that's something that I feel, or maybe that's the problem.
Self-censorship you're talking about?
Kind of, but I'm not talking about self-censorship because they are feared of, violating something. It's a kind of, it's kind of a situation that, when you have too much freedom, then you actually don't know what to talk about. You don't know what you are talking about. I sometimes feel like that's the biggest problem, actually. That's the kind of censorship that you cannot solve at all.
Maybe I can add one more thing. We have quite often discussions with the politicians, and they say, okay, maybe this is a nice exhibition, or maybe this is nice. And I always say to them, we made an agreement with each other. You are paying me for 6 exhibitions, so many educational programs, so many projects, and that's it. I'm doing that. So don't sit on my share. That's my job, and do your job by yourself. Mostly I come away with that.
Any other questions? Mizuki and then Pascal, or yeah.
My questions mainly goes to Errol. Nowadays, there are many international museums host the kind of blockbuster show featuring Comme des Garçons or Teoh in Paris, and I'm sure your textile museums, once you host those kind of big brand fashion exhibitions, people will come to see. But have you ever thought to host this exhibition? If you haven't, why? Why not?
Till now, we did not yet do it, and I think we will not do it, because I strongly believe that not all the blockbusters are really interesting exhibitions, to be honest. Where I strongly believe in, you can make a more difficult exhibition accessible by educational programs or interactive programs. to share the real quality behind it. So my approach will be more that one, that I choose the exhibitions which are important to share, and to explain, we add other programs. So I will not be a place where the blockbusters will be done.
I agree.
Great. And Pascal, and then you.
Thank you both for a beautiful presentation. Errol, I'm interested in your business model. Once you're going to... I'm cobbling my MBA together. Yeah. When you say that the maker is going to... Oh no, the visitor is kind of leaving as a maker. How do you... And I'm interested in but I'll talk to you later about that. The entrepreneurship incubator for young makers, let's say. But how do you, like in capacity, and because making is a slow process, and it involves materials, and it involves attention and technical support, and so how does that work in the future?
Yeah, that's also a challenge, because to be honest, we have around 250 projects a year, and that's too much, to be honest. And beside that, there are too many people and parties and architects and designers who wanted to work with us. So we have to be really selective, because otherwise we cannot handle that with 2 weaving machines and 2 master weavers, because we want to keep that quality high. So we deal with it by having a high standard of criteria of who is coming in and who is not coming in. We feel now that we sometimes too much have to disappoint people who are really good and deserve a place in our museum. So in that way, I want to extend our facilities for future, but in a good balance, so that we always can keep that good quality. About that visitor, we're still dealing with that question: how many visitors will be interested in becoming a maker? So we're thinking about side programs, because not everybody wants to sit behind that machine. So different programs for that. And we have to find out how it will work. But we also strongly believe we need a lot of different business models. For instance, the cafe, the label, the shop, the visitors, the payments for hiring the machines. And we're still thinking about having more business models, for instance, for conferences and all these kinds of things, to get a good balance between the support of the city government, 60%, and to catch the other 40%. I also told to the city government, okay, we are positioning this museum now in a social way, in a way for dealing with sustainability. So don't only focus on culture. I want to be at the economic department of the city government. I want to be at social welfare. They should also support us. So I'm looking for different forms of funding to realize the things we do. And I strongly believe, and I try to convince them, and I think I will, that it's important enough to pay for that, because it's worth paying for that. And it's another form of business model. It's a way of trying to find how can we finance that, because it's important.
Okay. It's the different values that Yoshiko talked about yesterday, I think.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I think we are out of time for this session, but I want to let Yoshiko ask the next question, as the last question for this session.
I have a question of the first person who had asked about the censorship. Is that in Malaysia, you have a strong censorship by the government? Was that the question? Because you would think America, United States, is a country of freedom of speech, but I was at a Scholars Center at the Smithsonian at 92 and 93, And at the Museum of American Art, I was there, and Betsy Brown was the director. And two incidents. One was it was an exhibition that she supported the scholars. I think this is the very important mission of the museum, to broaden and rewrite sometimes history. And that's what they did. It was called How the West Was Won. And this was to use the paintings in the American Art Museum, which romanticized this how West was won by the white people. But that was really a barbaric, very disrespectful act. And actually, that was a time that they had, through these paintings, the scholars had kind of evaluated these paintings. And notion of the paintings that was backed by this white supremacy, Anglo-Saxons over the native people. And the Betsy Brown got such a flack from the senators from North Carolina. I mean, there was a talk of cutting the funding. And the second exhibition that the Betsy Brown also supported was I think, the Chicago World's Fair. And the scholars studied the way the pavilions were built in hierarchical ways, and how that had reflected the discrimination against different colored people or different cultures. So then, actually, that exhibition, she could not fully go through with it because, again, these politicians with different agendas, different political ideas, fought, and they could. So I can fully empathize your question. I just wanted to say, because the answers seem like, no, we don't have that problem kind of thing. But even in the United States, we have that problem.
But may I add something to that also? I also strongly believe that we all have here, as people who are working in the cultural field, could say more than the general civilian.
Yes.
I don't want to bow for censorship, even if it will cost my subsidy.
But there is.
I know there is, but I don't neglect that. I agree with you, but I think just don't accept it.
And I think it's important that the museum directors feel that responsibility. It's fiduciary responsibilities to the public.
So,
anyways.
Thank you.